The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclecs Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? I hope you're having a wonderful Friday. Shout out to you. You survived yet another week in 2020. That in itself deserves a drink. It deserves a toast. It deserves a cookie, something, So shout out to you. So happy to have you here. We're so happy to keep the Charlotte Podcast Festival moving along. My name is Perrine DeShield, and I'm going to actually be not only your moderator for this session, but also one of our fellow presenters. Look at that. We're multitasking out here. So I'm so happy to be a part of the Charlotte Podcast Festival, along with just WFAE, which is NPR's, our local NPR station, Charlotte's leading NPR station, also with the Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and my agency, Eclecs. So we've been going strong, guys. We've been hitting the pavement, hitting the ground running, zooming along for the past few weeks. And I'm just so happy to introduce this hour session. We're going to be talking about practical ways to promote your podcast using social media and websites, okay? So we love the digital world. We love how now we can connect with our listeners on a variety of different platforms. So we're just happy to bring that to you. And we have so many amazing people here with us who are going to be sharing their knowledge and hoping that you just soak it all up, just like an amazing little Charlotte Podcast Festival sponge. All right, so first off, let me introduce you to our first speaker, okay? So we have Jen Lang here. Let's hear it for Jen Lang. Hi. Yes,
Hi, everybody.
I see. Yes. Shout out to Jen. So Jen is WFAE's Senior Editor of Digital News and Product. Jennifer Lang has guided WFAE's growth in the digital space. As the station's first web producer, Jennifer was the only WFAE staffer working on the station's website for many years, holding down the fort, y'all, all right? So Jennifer transitioned to WFAE.org through changes of content management systems, created the station's first social media presences, and assists with digital coverage of Charlotte news. Look at Jen. Let's hear it for Jen again. Yes, Jen. So happy to have you. Jen's also a graduate of Auburn University.
War Eagle.
Okay, all right now. Okay. Next, we have Mr. Chris Curitan. All right. So Chris is an art and media director for On Life and Meaning podcast hosted by Mark Perez. It's a podcast that explores what matters most as guests discuss their talents, projects, motivations, and higher purposes. It's deep. Okay. It's deep, right? Okay. Chris Curitan is also the creative director for Bolt Group, okay? So Bolt Group is Charlotte's design innovation firm where he shares his experiences and dedication to designing communication tools for great ideas. Who doesn't love that? He's giving us a bolt of energy today. Shout out to Chris Curitan.
Thank you.
Like the NBA, like how they don't have people there, like they had the bubble and they had those horrible sound effects. It's like I'm those sound effects for you today.
You're a great hype man. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I try. All right, so a little bit about me. So you're probably wondering who's this crazy person just screaming at me on Zoom right now, right? So I'm Perrine DeShield. I am a first-generation Liberian American and an avid podcaster. So I've created, edited, co-hosted, done graphic design and web design for 2 podcasts. My first is called First Gens. It's about being a first generation American and filling in the blanks beside the hyphen. And the second, The Quarantine Couch, which is kind of self-explanatory, right? Just quarantine on the couch like we have been. I've also taught a few podcasting workshops. But just through my full-time working experiences with Belk headquarters here in Charlotte, I've also worked in marketing. I've worked in communications, event planning, and kind of done a variety of different random things. And I'm also very involved in our community. I sit on the board of the Charlotte Alliance Young Professionals, and I also do a whole bunch of random stuff with Black Market Charlotte, who's a creative agency in Camp North End. So for years, I've been helping family members for free, friends for free, until I decided to create my own agency at the end of last year. So with my agency, Eclecs, we help small businesses and unique brands really instill growth. We try to promote marketing, branding, graphics, podcast coaching, all of that good stuff. So we're happy to be a part of this festival. All right. So enough about me. We're excited to talk to you about just, again, graphics and websites and how you can really take your podcast marketing to the next level, okay? We look forward to answering your questions throughout this entire session, but we do ask that you keep your mic muted, okay? We don't want, the cat ruffling in the background and whatnot as our session speakers are giving you all this knowledge. So just be mindful of that. We do also ask that you hold your questions until the end of the hour. We're going to get to your questions and kind of answer them during a more formal Q&A. But if you have something just burning in your spirit, burning in your soul, put it in the chat and we'll try to get to it as soon as we can. All right. We encourage you all to check out a full list. We still have sessions for this festival going on, y'all. It's going until the 30th of this month, okay? So make sure you go to charlottepodcastfestival.com and make sure that you also share your experience about today's session and more by using our hashtag. Millennials love a good hashtag, hashtag CLT Podcast Fest, okay? So support the festival by just going to the website and learning more and all of that good stuff, all right? So do we have you guys locked in? Are you locked in? I think you're excited. I think you're hyped to be here. So, right. So let's get started with it. So first, we're going to get into our presentation for the session. All right. So again, we're going to be talking today about practical ways to promote your podcast using social media and websites. All right. So I want to, talk to, my fellow panelists and session leaders today, right? So again, social media is a big deal, right? And so we kind of want to just talk to you all about what we feel is the best platforms for podcasters. So Chris and Jen, what would you say ranks supreme when it comes to social media platforms for podcasters?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and kick that off. I think that what's great about social media is that social aspect. And from a podcast standpoint, you're throwing stuff out there into the world and you're hoping people listen. Social media is a great way to hear some feedback. So go out and talk to people, connect with people. And so for me, I think Facebook is a great opportunity to get that feedback, to start building a community around what these discussions that you're having are. And so that's what I've used predominantly. I'll let Jennifer jump in before I keep talking.
Yeah, social is such a valuable tool for reaching your audiences and trying to target the audiences based on the different social channels. And we all are stretched for time. So, pick the ones that are going to make the most sense for you to work with, maybe that have, demographics, age, for your social, for your podcast. And, except that you're not going to be able to be everywhere and meet everywhere on every channel. So focus where you need to be. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, those are all great. And if you can manage that, then go for all of them, but don't try to bite off too much.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And to your point, Jennifer, knowing what the platforms are good for in themselves is a great way to strategize where to put those efforts. So if you think about Instagram and the fact that that's very image heavy content. So what can you bring to that platform that people are going to gravitate towards because they're there for one reason, compared to Twitter, which is probably going to be a little bit more text heavy, more immediate, breaking news announcement type of thing. LinkedIn Probably makes more sense if you have a business or career-oriented podcast. Pinterest, that one's a stretch for me. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but
Right.
maybe if you have a fashion, decor, interior design podcast, maybe that makes sense for you. If we consider YouTube as a social platform, I think that one's great as well, because a lot of podcasts, they're being recorded live and they're being posted there, and you're getting an opportunity to be in the mix with that, even if you're just posting audio. But that's another platform that I think is good.
True. Yes. And also keep in mind, social media is called social media because it's supposed to be, a gathering place. And so you don't want to, again, spread yourself too thin where you're not going to be able to engage with that audience that you're trying to develop. And hopefully we'll be developing through these channels.
Exactly. Those are amazing, I think, just tips and resources for you all. I completely agree with everything that Jen and Chris just mentioned, and especially what Jen mentioned about just knowing your demographic, right? Knowing where they live, or where they spend the most time on social media, right? So that's why it's really important to do like surveys and use different like platforms to actually host your podcast to get really good analytics and metrics so that you can then apply that to your marketing, right? So social media is a networking, platform, but it's also an amazing, powerful tool for marketing when used the right way and used consistently, right?
Mhm.
So speaking of consistency, we've had a lot of really great sessions during this week, just talking about graphics, talking about visual elements. Shout out to Lisa Spear. We had sessions on that specifically, and she even did one on just like podcast branding this week. So when we're talking about just graphics and making sure that it's a reflection of your podcast brand, we want to make sure that we can share some resources with you, such as unsplash.com, pixels.com for free stock photography. If you do need additional visual elements, if you are not using your handy dandy iPhone that actually has a really good camera on it, that looks well on social media, but also just different opportunities where you can also either sharpen your skills and use platforms like Canva to create your own graphics, or work with a designer. So Chris and Jen, have you all both like worked with graphic designers in the past? Like what kinds of tips would you give our audience on just podcast graphics and actually executing them?
Yeah, so I at being a designer, I have agreed with a lot of the things that we've talked about on the other sessions. Hopefully, folks in here had a chance to experience that. But even if you look here on the bottom right of your slide, having a visual sort of effect or approach to the way you're visualizing or showing your visuals, that's a great way to create some consistency, to create a presence to where when people see your images pop up, they know exactly where it's coming from. And that way you're working less hard, right? It's templatized, so you can do it quickly, but it's also a shorthand for people looking at it. So I think those would be the two for speed and efficiency purposes. A great way to get a lot of punch in a short amount of time.
Agreed. We have the good luck fortune to work with a designer. Also, and my team work in Canva a lot. We like Canva for quick turnaround items that we need to do. Stencil is another really good source out there. And then, if you've got it, the old standby Photoshop, you can still do a lot with it too. But maintaining that visual branding and consistency that Chris mentioned is so important. So any way you can get to that, make that happen for yourself.
Yes. And again, if you don't know of any specific graphic designers, try to put a filler out there on your social media platform saying you're looking for someone who can assist you, right? Looking for anyone that you can collaborate, whether it's a freelancer, someone that you contract, or reaching out to, said Chris, who has an agency. So it's really important to kind of build your network that way and also build your team, because again, this is how you are marketing your podcast. So you want to make sure that you have your bases covered. Another suggestion that we have, and I would love for you all to chime in, is making sure that if you have any kind of content calendar, right, to actually plan maybe your posts in advance so that you don't feel overwhelmed when the time comes, right? What you don't want is, it's the day that your episode's coming out and it's already out or it's about to be out in a few minutes and you have not marketed it at all. So it's good to just try to do those pre-planning kinds of things as much as possible. So Jen and Chris, do you guys have anything that you'd like to chime in just about like content planning?
A calendar is an excellent choice, and whatever calendar works the best for you. I find that there's terrific organizational tools, but if they don't work for me, then I'm not going to use them. So whatever calendar you like to keep things on. But another lifesaver for me with social is using a scheduling tool. I personally, we use Buffer. And I like Buffer because it is just so clean and simple. And this is a way to schedule your posts ahead of time so that when an episode is coming out, you're not having to think, did I put that to Twitter? Did I send that to Facebook? What have I done? You could do this weeks in advance if you like. Hootsuite is another excellent tool as well. Yeah. And those can act as your calendar as well, your social calendar.
Yeah, I love the idea for the calendar in general, because that's when you start getting into the strategy conversation. And so when we talk about strategy, that means you're talking about what makes sense for communicating your podcast in general. And so when you're making that plan, you have to think through those things. What is adding value to your podcast? What are you bringing to light that will get people more interested to listen, to continue listening? And so planning and having a strategy that fits into the vision around what you're trying to communicate is always a great thing.
Yes. So co-sign what Jen mentioned and everything that Chris said about just strategy and planning. Also using those two resources that Jen mentioned. She said Buffer and Hootsuite. So again, those are two planning, scheduling kind of digital content calendars that can help you manually post items, but then also have them automated. So they have different plans that you can kind of set up. So make sure that you all look into those different options as well. All right, so let's move in along. We're going to give you all a few social tips, okay? So really quickly, we're going to have Jen. She's going to actually share a few items from just WFAE. They have so many amazing podcasts, and they've been using different platforms to actually market and promote them. So let's see what Jen has.
So we won't talk more about graphics, but just to show you a way that we're using some of ours, you may recognize this banner that we have at the top of our Twitter feed. When we're having launches of podcasts, special series, podcast festival, we create banners for all of our social channels that we use to promote those. Also for our podcast, we have pre-created, our designer has made social cards for us, which gets to the point Chris was making earlier about having that consistent branding that people are going to see it immediately and know, hey, this is Amplifier. So here's an example of one of them that we have to promote Amplifier on Twitter. And this is a blank template that we have, and then we just plug in what we need to for each episode and a photo and share those. Twitter, we have this also for FAQ City. This is an audiogram that we put on Instagram. Not only is Instagram very favorable to photos, and if you've got good ones to go with it, that's great. Or you can have just the graphic image and lay over your audio and audiogram display and share snippets of your podcast there. And Southbound, this is something, the social card we have for our Southbound podcast that we put on Facebook. So I suggest that you lay out these images in Canva. Definitely has the images pre-sized for you, and you get to design whatever you need, be it a Facebook banner, Twitter banners, and then for the Twitter post, Facebook stories, Facebook posts. And I will stop sharing.
Awesome. Chris, do you want to share any like tips, any further tips with just like social that you've experienced or that you want to give to our audience?
I think we've hit a lot of the big ones. I would say that it's really, so the podcast is what we're trying to promote, right? And so the more that we can add value into that, to start building either a community or building a larger story around what connects all of your different episodes, I think that's a great way to strategize and plan around putting your social media schedule together.
I agree. Again, as much planning as you can do, the better off you are. So I was just kind of looking in the chat to kind of touch base. I want to read off one question from Landis before we continue on. So that's kind of our like social media kind of portion. We're going to connect that with website building and website design next. So Landis said, on the Charlotte Readers podcast, we do graphics and audiograms for episodes that we post in advance and on the day of episodes on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. But I would be interested in getting the panel to talk about the difference between awareness for the podcast and what works best to convert to listeners, right? So I guess like, what actually is more effective amongst all of those different platforms to then kind of obtain and attract new listeners. Do you guys have any thing you'd like to, can you chime in on that?
You mind if you repeated the last part just one more time?
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I want to make sure that I'm answering Landis's question correctly or asking it right. So what she's asking is, let's see. So they use, audiograms, they use graphics, and they try to post in advance on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. But I would be interested in getting the panel to talk about the difference between awareness for the podcast and what works best to convert to listeners. So whether it's just like, I guess, more generalized marketing for your podcast, opposed to trying to get new listeners for your podcast.
Right. And to me, that sounds like there's one avenue of just promoting and advertising different episodes. And then there's talking about what the podcast is actually about. And the way I look at that is, awareness is one thing where you're just telling someone, you've posted a new episode. But the other aspect of this is, why would people be interested in general? And what we do for Bowl Group from day to day is, how do we promote companies? And that idea kind of speaks to this as well. It's why should someone believe in you? Why should someone listen? Why should someone connect with what you're putting out there? And the way I look at that is, connect. Don't talk about what necessarily the episode is, but reach out and maybe there's some just, have you ever experienced this? Have you, where you're connecting with your audience in a way that's not just, here's another episode.
Also, if you have guests in your podcast, you leverage them and their audiences. Joni Deutsch, the host of Amplifier, WFAE's Charlotte Music Podcast, does a great job with this. She has templates for social graphics that she sends to each of episode's guests so that they can promote their own their appearance on this podcast. They have different networks than WFAE has, and so they can reach a different audience and say, hey, we're on this. That gives this podcast validation that we might not receive on our own. And, we can do all the awareness and promotion that we want, but getting your guests or the people, that you're talking about to also buy in and help promote that for you is key.
That's a great point.
Right.
Because people, especially if you're using photos of people and if you see someone that pop up on your feed, you're much more likely to look into what that's about. And so to add to that, maybe you're giving your guests tools to help you promote that. So, you know, if you're handing off, hey, I'm going to push this out there. If you want to push it to your network as well, great.
Yes. 100% co-sign on what Jen and Chris just mentioned, especially what they both said about cross promotion and getting out in your community, right? So making sure that you are creating content for your targeted audience. We talked about virtual and live events earlier this week for the podcast festival, which was just an amazing opportunity of how a lot of people really either they might partner with a local artist, whether they're a poet or a musician, and have them like open, you know, their live podcast event, whether again it's virtual or in person. I think that goes to say for both guests, like what Jen and Chris mentioned, and also just cross promotion. All right. So make sure that you're building a community as well with your podcast, with whatever subject matter you're tapping on. Okay. So make sure that you're not just, you know, posting and running away. Make sure you're connecting and engaging. Again, it's social media, right? So the more that you're engaged with your audience, the more it'll grow. Right. So thank you so much, Landis, for that question. Landis is going to be teaching a session next week about just legalities and just podcast law in a sense. So thank you so much, Landis. I appreciate your question. We're going to get back to our questions towards the end of the session. We're going to get back into our presentation right now and kind of transition into websites. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about website platforms for podcasts. So there are a few faves, you know, there's so many different website platforms out there, but if we had to kind of tap on a few that we're most familiar with and what we've used personally here on this panel, it would be WordPress, Squarespace, and Wix. Okay, so we want to kind of touch base on this a little bit. Jen's going to share her screen and go through a few of WFAE's WordPress created websites and kind of walk you all through how that was, you know, created, why they selected, you know, the different pages, and kind of give you a whole bunch of background information. All right.
So,
do you want to start, Jen?
Everybody can see Amplifier. The reason we have chosen WordPress is just simply because it's what I've worked with the most, besides the content management system that hosts our website, WFAE.org. WordPress I've been working with for over a decade, spinning up one-off sites or these for our podcast over the last few years, because it allows a little more flexibility than what our overall website has, and having this flexibility allows us to brand these podcasts differently, and there's so much flexibility with WordPress. So you've been looking at the homepage for Amplifier. This was a great gift that our designer made, and we've used it on social to promote. I was able to convert it to an MP4 so that it would, in this template on WordPress, it has a header that allows for a movie. And so I put that here so we could keep that energy of a music podcast going. And then with the layout, we can try to keep it nice and clean, but keeping social share links always visible. It allows for a monetization here through a sponsorship, a little, keeping it in front of you, you know, what is this podcast? What's it about? Ways to subscribe. Let people have many options to subscribe to this podcast. But also here you can listen. We go ahead and put the audio straight into the post so that people can listen from this website as well. And can go do a deep dive. If they're just discovering us and they want to get in here, do a deep dive into the all the episodes we have, learn a little more about each episode. We have the pages for each one that come with some highlights from the interview that Joni has done, more video if they have. We list the playlist because there's always music played. We also have a map here that we've created that shows venues around Charlotte where many of our guests have played. Moving to a different podcast, Inside Politics, for the most of last year, was a politics website about the political convention, the RNC, that was supposed to be in town. And slightly different look, but it kept us tied into the Charlotte and politics and the look of the skyline. Again, ways to subscribe to your podcast. Keep those front and center, because they're not always going to be coming back to your website, but you want them to subscribe and have that podcast with them always. We have a newsletter with this one, so I was able to embed easily a sign up to get the weekly newsletter, which corresponded with the podcast, but sometimes offered different perspective than and deeper stories around the politics in Charlotte. She Says was an investigative podcast a couple of years ago. Totally different look and feel. We worked with our designer for logo work. We use these logos, like I showed you earlier, on our social media, changing the banners. We also worked with an artist to create the art for each episode. This was one that using photos wasn't going to work, because this was a look into a court case and legal proceedings and one woman's relationship with police and her case. So thinking about ways that we could display that besides photographic images, we landed on having an artist design these for us. Then The List is another investigative series. We worked with that same artist to get a different look for this podcast. And again, went with a very large image on the homepage to draw people into The List, which was a podcast about the clergy sexual abuse problems in the Charlotte diocese. And subscribe, always keep that way up front for you. Pages are going to be kind of slow to load. Oh, yeah. But see, we wanted the website to have dramatic visual appeal to draw in the reader, listener. And this is our new website, just launched almost 2 weeks ago now, where we keep our podcast featured on the website that then push back to the WordPress sites. So I can stop sharing now. Just wanted to give y'all all a little stroll through different designs on WordPress.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jen. Those are great. And again, each of those podcasts looks so different, but I think that they all have the same core features, right? That we would suggest, for any podcast website to really have. So those are great, beautiful websites. I love a good WordPress. So next we're going to have Chris. Chris, would you like to share your screen and kind of walk us through your website?
Sure, absolutely. And I thought that was great, Jen. Again, while I'm pulling this up, just want to appreciate everybody for being here today. Again, the sessions have been great. I've gotten a lot out of them. I hope everyone else has as well. And here we go. So Jen, I think WordPress is awesome. I've used it a lot in my career, and there's so much you can do with it. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about Squarespace, because I feel like WordPress, there are a lot of things that you might feel more comfortable getting into it if you know a little bit about how websites are developed or how they get done. Where I think Squarespace is good for if you're a little bit more of an entry level and you're just getting into building websites. It has a great sort of walk you through the process flow to it. So and on top of that, I think it's pretty reasonably priced considering if you're looking to buy a domain and get it hosted from a monthly fee standpoint, it is pretty reasonable with all those combined. They do have multiple platform or multiple avenues of pricing, and there's a personal account which for this website that Mark Paris and I created on Life and Meeting with Andy Go. We looked at, they have a personal account, which you can only have 2 contributors. So the fact that our team had 3 people, that didn't really work. So we bumped it up to the business account, which you get unlimited contributors, but there's also an e-commerce aspect added to that, which allows you to take donations. So that was another reason we went with that. There is another level to it, but that's really more if you're trying to do bigger e-commerce sites. What I like about Squarespace as well is that it integrates very well with GoDaddy or other hosting sites. They're usually almost a push of a button type of thing, which is great. So if you buy your domain somewhere else and you want to build a Squarespace site, it's pretty easy to do that. And from a stability standpoint, they've been around for a good while now, and I've used them for many years, and I've never had any issues with sites crashing or from a hosting standpoint or anything like that. So that's very key to me as well. They have great customer support. I'm not getting paid for this endorsement, but these are some good things to think about as you're deciding which platform you want to go with. Like I said, there's a lot of customizable aspects of working with WordPress. But I think if you're not looking to get too crazy with things, Squarespace is a great place to start from a template standpoint. It also pre-thinks through how people can flow through your site. So you can sort of look at their templates and see how you might apply that to your website and have a starting point. It also integrates very well with MailChimp. I know a lot of you probably have newsletters or email lists that you want to get your podcast out to in that route. And they have forms you can set up that are integrated very nicely with MailChimp or other newsletter platforms. So you can have people fill out forms and have it go directly into your MailChimp or whatever it is, whatever list you have. Again, I think the only con I would say is that you will hit some walls if you try to do too many customized effects or change too many things. But within their limitations, I think there's a lot you can do and make it feel like your own. So with that said, I'm going to take a step back and talk through how Mark Paris and I came about creating a website for On Life and Meeting. And I'll take a step back and tell you a little bit about Mark. He was in, I think, the first session and maybe a couple other ones, but Mark's a professor at Johnson & Wales. He teaches leadership and also ethics. And I've worked with him on a number of projects, but all of them really having a focus on being a good citizen. He's very much into the humanities and art in general. And so this podcast that he wanted to create was about reaching out to people that he saw were consciously having an effect on the communities around them and helping shape those communities in some way, shape, or form. And so he saw this podcast as, how do I create a gallery of sorts, a gallery of portraits, a podcast about what matters most to people that really digs into why people do what they do and what gives their life meaning through that. And as a designer and at Bold Group, we really believe in the behind the scenes vision for creating anything. But when you're designing your website, I think that's very important. We talked a little bit about it earlier. And there's been sessions where we talk about branding and creating this vision for what you're putting out there. But knowing what you're trying to communicate is key in all of this. And so I think at the beginning, Mark saw, he knew he wanted to have a podcast on the Apple podcast app, but that's very limiting from a storytelling aspect. You get that little blurb and then you have your episodes. And so he knew he wanted to do a whole lot more. And I think that's what the beauty of having a website is, you have a lot more control of how that story comes out. Just thinking through Apple podcasts or Spotify or even the social media accounts that we looked at, there's a lot of things happening outside of your content. And the website is what you have control over. And so when people will land on your website, what they see is what you're putting in front of them. And so let's walk through that a little bit. So what's key is when we talk about when you're building a website, there's two things to consider. People are coming there for their own reasons, and then you have your reasons of what you want to communicate to them. And I think that's a balancing act of you need to get them the information they're looking for, but you're also having the opportunity to tell your story. And so when we put this homepage together, we wanted to make sure that we got our main point across very quickly, but knowing that people really were just trying to get to the podcast. So you'll see right at front and center what this podcast is about. It's a podcast about what matters most. You see conversations that inform and inspire, the next thing below that. But right in this dead center, let's get to the podcast, start listening. And so that is there. When we talk about expanding upon Mark's vision, that gallery of portraits, that's where that started coming in and building visuals that supported that idea. And so here it's almost like this is sort of a gallery with little artist statements underneath, right? What these people are about. And just from, scrolling, you see that this is going to be little snapshots, little vignettes of these people and what they're doing in their communities. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. What's also important when we were thinking through this is the website is also a great opportunity for you to talk to people if you're looking for sponsors. So not everybody's on podcasts. If you need to send an email and say, hey, I'm looking for a sponsor, it might be that you just send them this website and they get a sense of what you're trying to do right there. A lot easier than if you sent them to Apple Podcasts. So we knew we wanted to have opportunities to say, hey, this is where we promote our sponsors on our website. And then for our listeners, we also want to give them an opportunity to contribute to the show. So having the Patreon link there on every page as well. Again, from a homepage standpoint, what is the main point that you're trying to communicate? And then what do you think your audience is coming to your website to find out about in general? And so from a navigation standpoint, we had a page that was about a little bit of the background about the team and what the podcast was about. We had the podcast, which Mark wrote essays that he read in each podcast. So that's a place where you could download those. And then I talked about the e-commerce aspects of Squarespace. And so he put those essays and a little bit about the episodes together in a book. And we were able to sell that very easily through Squarespace's e-commerce setup. I did want to just show what the episodes page looked like, since that was a big part of our homepage. And again, it's vignettes of these folks, or this gallery of portraits. The important thing here was to, again, give a quick snapshot, but get right to the episodes. So they can play directly from this page. We use Libsyn, which is a great resource where you can host your podcast, but they also give you, similar to what YouTube, they give you embed codes that you can customize so that they fit into your website's format. So we were able to customize the colors and the way this looks to fit into the look and feel of the site. And you'll see that our podcast artwork has been reflected throughout the whole site as well. So you're sending those little signals to people from a brand standpoint. And when you click into these episodes, a few things I wanted to know. We're all familiar with show notes. It's given an overview of what the episode's about. It's telling you what we talk about in the episode. But then I want to link this back to the social media conversation. We actually included questions. So when you listen to the podcast, we're assuming some of the questions that might come up as you're listening to it. And then we're inviting people to interact with us on our Facebook page. So, again, it's how do we add value to the podcast and further tell the story. but also build a community so people are coming back and listening. And again, because we've templatized these episode show note pages, hi sponsors, we're going to include your logos on each one of these pages as another added benefit.
All right, Chris, we're getting a little close on time.
Sorry.
So just want to be able to have enough time for questions and whatnot.
I'm good.
Are you good?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Okay, so I think it's great that both Jen and Chris shared some amazing, tips and the different platforms that they use. I also use Squarespace for my First Gen's podcast. And so I use Squarespace, but then also with my agency and different clients that I've had, I've also used Wix. Wix is something that I used back in the day. If anyone knows Weebly, does anyone remember Weebly? I used Weebly back in college. Then I switched and started using WordPress. Then I found out about Wix, and Wix got a little crazy and weird. So then I started moving to Squarespace because I liked how clean and how simple their templates were. And then I actually started going back to Wix, and it's kind of crazy because what's great about these websites that already have these built-in templates for you is that they allow you to kind of like take the pain or the headache out of it, right? So they allow for you to then get different templates that you can use as a starting point, opposed to starting from scratch, right? So even if you're someone who knows a little bit about web design, or even if you don't, I think that those kinds of sites are really helpful to kind of give you a good head start, right? And so I love how Lori is like, yeah, Weebly was a tool back in the day, right? Don't sleep on Weebly, y'all. Like, don't sleep on Weebly. So really quickly, I just want to share our First Gen's page. Again, very like pretty clean and simple, giving people a button so that they can listen, allowing people to chime in, to basically be a guest, giving them the opportunity to like apply to be a guest on a specific subject matter, showing your face, who you are, who are your co-hosts, allowing, and what's cool about Squarespace, because this is a website built on Squarespace, just like everything Chris already said, he went deep into it. So I'm just skimming the surface, but you can add videos, right? You can add different imagery and photographs. You can connect your Instagram account or any social media stream so that you can see it as well. So I really, really love a good old Squarespace site. Here's a website that I built for one of my clients using Wix. Okay, so her name is the Burger Diva in Charlotte. And what's really cool about Diana, she also is interested in podcasting. So I wanted to create a really fun, visually appealing website, a place where she could do blogs and whatnot. But you can integrate audio and different like audio players into Wix as well. So I just wanted to share that with you all so that you guys can note that. And one of the reasons why, again, I really like Wix now is because I think that they're really great with just customizing and moving everything around. Whereas Squarespace, I'm the kind of person who's really extra. And if I have something in my head and I'm like, no, I want my background to be like this, or I want animation here, Squarespace sometimes kind of like, gives you the template and they're like, stick to it. And I'm like, I don't want to stick to it. I want more. So I'm just extra. So that's why I use Wix too. So yeah, I want to get to a few questions. Okay. And so let's see what I've been able to pull from the chat. All right. So someone mentioned, and I think this is a question more so for Jen, pertaining to WordPress. When collecting donations through website that is through WordPress, Patreon, or different, do you use Patreon or a different plugin? Like, how can you collect donations directly to your WordPress site?
Unfortunately, I don't know a lot about Patreon. I mean, I know about it. We don't use it. Our WFAE is listener supported, and we use Allegiance, which is, I believe, for multiple, all nonprofits, not just public media specific. And they have an array of donate widgets and pages that we can build. I keep it simple with a donate button that's on every page, every post, that goes back to our main WFAE Allegiance donation page.
Okay, awesome. And so let's see. WordPress also has a subscription feature. Have you utilized the subscription feature on WordPress, Jen?
I have not, because I'm using the WordPress mainly to highlight the episodes, give the show notes, and more information, but also driving to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play. So I've not used that subscription model.
Gotcha. All right, so let's talk a little bit about website traffic. How do you feel like that matches up to your podcast downloads? And that's a question for both Chris and Jen.
I have to be honest, Mark handled that mostly for our team.
It doesn't really match. I mean, our downloads usually are higher, but it shouldn't steer you away from having a website, because like Chris said, it's a great way for, showing potential sponsors of what you're doing. It's another thing to share to help build your audience. But don't get disappointed if the page view numbers are a lot lower than your downloads. You want the downloads.
Right. It's good to just also kind of like monopolize in a sense and have like your podcast accessible on as many platforms as possible. So obviously, on your website, right? If you're taking people to your website, it's great to have a built-in player that you can actually have people listen to your podcast, right? Again, that's the product that you're marketing. So make sure that you have that. But 100% what Jen said, like, don't let that deter, anything in regards to the downloads, because at the end of the day, you do also want that. So it's good to also take people to the place where they already listen to their podcast, their Spotify's, their, Apple Podcasts, and directly link them to it from your website, but then also give them that option as well. All right, let's talk a little bit about transcriptions. So do you all use transcription? Do you transcribe all of your podcasts? And do you always like post them for people to read on your website?
We do a mix. The Southbound, Amplifier, and FAQ City get highlights. Our investigative series, She Says in the List, we transcribed and put the full transcription on our sites. There's a lot of transcription tools out there. I've seen Otter AI mentioned a couple of times, pops up in the chat, worked with it. The one we work with most often is Trint, Trint. And they have various subscription levels. I think there's a base a month that's free, and then you can purchase how much you would need, and they measure by the minute, I believe, and so does Otter. Those are good ones.
Yeah. I do like the use of transcriptions, also from an SEO standpoint, especially on the websites. That's another reason Squarespace and WordPress are really great for this. I don't know much about Wix, but a lot of the SEO building is built in already. And so people just searching for terms might land on your website and then find your podcast just by having more content on your pages.
There you go. All right, so this is a question more so for Chris. So what app or plugin do you suggest to get podcast reviews to appear on your Squarespace website?
Podcast reviews to appear on your Squarespace. We did not use that. I believe there is a widget that can pull those in, but I am not sure. And again, these things get updated almost weekly on these platforms like Squarespace. So there might be even something newer and better now. But I know it's possible, but that's not something we used. I would say that a great tool for pushing out the podcast, we used repurpose.io, which we were able to link that with Libsyn and automatically be able to upload our audio with an image to YouTube. which is another avenue and another place where you can get more social and reviews that way.
Awesome. So for both of you, what are your thoughts on posting full episodes as audiograms on YouTube?
Oh, there you go.
What are your thoughts on that?
Have considered it, haven't done it. I'm not really sure why. But I mean, I know some people do it and have success with it. And off the top of my head, I can't really remember why we haven't done it.
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things, right? Where I think, again, monopolizing and trying to get your podcast on as many different platforms as possible, because people do listen actually to podcasts on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of growing more and more. So, and I want for you to kind of also clarify, Jen, audiograms. I haven't used audiograms, but is that just kind of a platform that you can put your audio clip into, and then it gives you like that sound wave for graphic purposes?
Headliner is a good tool to use to create those.
Okay.
I think there was once upon a time something called audiogram, and so I still refer to them as that, but Headliner creates those. And yeah, you put in your audio, it gives you ability not to do a lot of editing, but some minor clipping to get that sound bite that's going to grab somebody's attention. And then it creates the little waves, and it gives you a output that you can embed. Then we take that and put it in Canva and to those cards that we've created, and create the Headliner audio social image from there.
To your point, though, a lot of people are using YouTube for all kinds of things, including listening to podcasts. I know people that listen to music exclusively on YouTube, which is weird to me, but
yeah.
Oh,
it happens.
I do it when I'm sitting at my desk. One other thing that just popped to mind, we one time had a series. I wouldn't do a full, hour-long episode of a podcast, but a special series that we were broadcasting that we had created, and we did it as a Facebook Live. I just put up a still image from about the series, and then we went live on Facebook with that audio.
Yes. There's so many ways, powerful tools and ways that you can, again, take advantage of social media for your podcast. So I hope we're able to get to as many questions as we possibly could, to answer as much as we could. We do want to remind you all that we now have a Facebook page for the Charlotte Podcast Festival. So make sure you go there and you check it out. We want to keep this community growing and building. And for our two amazing presenters and session speakers, both Jen and Chris, we'd also like to invite you all to join that Facebook page. If you all have any additional questions, so sorry we couldn't get to them all today. Make sure that you maybe drop them on the Facebook page. You might see one of us mosey on over and answer that question for you. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for the Charlotte Podcast Festival session. Just a reminder, right? We're going to have a full list of all of our sessions, our speakers, and additional resources on our website, charlottepodcastfestival.com. So make sure you check it out. You register for the many sessions that we still have to come. We still got a full week, in us. So make sure that you join us for it. Okay. Also make sure that you share your experiences using our hashtag on social media. Again, podcasts hashtags are amazing. So use hashtag CLT Podcast Fest. We have these beautiful locally printed t-shirts that were created by some local designers here in Charlotte. So shout out to McFly Fresh. This is a way that you can continue to support the work that we're doing here in the community. You can find out more information on how to purchase this by going to our website as well. And again, just make sure that you join us. We have something else happening tonight at 6 p.m. We have our virtual happy hour where maybe sipping on something a little stronger than water. We're all grown here. So if you want to grab a little wine or something, why not do it? Join us. It's a great way to network again with a lot of amazing podcasters from all around the world, everyone. When I say the UK, Sydney, Australia, Jamaica, the Philippines, and that's just what I've seen this past week. So it's really, really amazing. We're so grateful for you all. thank you so much for joining us. Again, I'm Perrine DeShield. I hope you had an amazing time in this session. Again, a big shout out to Jen Lang and Chris Cureton. Everyone have a great weekend. All right.
Thank you.
Party. Bye, guys.